Hi everyone, welcome to the first Torah study, Lunch and Learn of the spring 2023 semester. I wanted to do something relevant to law obviously and in topical. So the topic of today was accidental shooting, the case of Kim Potter and Alec Baldwin. I don't know how much how far we'll get into all the possible details, but I wanted to start discussing the topic because gun violence is a big problem. So here obviously it was. So this is for those who don't know. The two cases we're referring to, Kim Potter was a police officer who had both, who had on her holster, she had both a taser and a gun, and protocol dictated that she should take the taser, but instead she used her gun and shot a person. Again, it was she was allowed in a way to use her taser, but she was not obviously authorized, and she wasn't supposed to use her gun, but she was in the moment, and even though there's training, she reached for the wrong weapon and fired the wrong weapon and killed someone. Alec Baldwin, on a set of a movie, was handed a gun which was supposed to be a prop gun, turned out to be a loaded with live ammunition, and he also killed someone. Total. He was doing his job. Someone handed him a gun which was supposed to be loaded with blanks, and it turns out he killed someone. So I wanted to talk about those two cases. Now, obviously, there's no exact parallels when we learn the Torah, the Talmud. So we're going to just, investigate and think of, what we can learn from the Torah about these cases. To me, the most similar. Okay, we'll get there. So we'll just go through the sources here. You have on page 1. Page 1 and 2 start off with the 3 biblical sources for accidental killings. So, according to the Bible, according to the Torah, if you kill someone accidentally, there is the famous, that was the backdrop of my poster. If you notice, the backdrop of the flyer was what we call a city of refuge, and here an Ir Miklat. So, if you kill inadvertently, there's no capital punishment, but rather you are exiled to a city of refuge, an Ir Miklat, until the death of the high priest. And the Torah, in a few places, here we have Numbers chapter 35, Exodus chapter 21, Deuteronomy chapter 19. Besides in Exodus, it just says if you kill someone not on purpose, and it was an act of God, meaning it happened, then God gives you a place to run away to. But in Numbers 35, there's a much longer explanation. Basically, if you had a weapon like a stone, and you cause someone, you're a murderer. But if it was without malice of forethought, if you take a look at verse 22, right, or you hurled an object unintentionally, or you inadvertently dropped something on someone and it killed them, then if the rabbis or if the court decides that it was inadvertent, then you do not, the punishment is, it's either a punishment or some form of atonement. You have to run away to exile. In Hebrew, galut, you run away to exile into this city of refuge near Miklat until the time ends, and that which is until the high priest dies. So which could be tomorrow or it could be never. You could be in the city of refuge for a day. You could be there for 20 years with no way of knowing. Okay, and then last but not least, at the top of page 2 from Deuteronomy, and this is the famous case. We'll talk about it in a second, which says, if you look at verse 5, if a man goes with another person into a courtyard, or to a grove, what's that? We're on top of page 2. Sorry, Deuteronomy 19, verse 5. So if you go to a forest to chop wood, and then when he's swinging to cut the tree, something flies out and strikes another person and he dies. So that is the classic example of inadvertent killing. Okay? Now, what exactly is the case is actually a debate in the Mishnah, the Talmud. Here you have the second source of page 2, Makot 7b. So today we have much better manufacturing processes. So today axes, you can make an axe out of one piece of metal, let's say, or you could really fuse the metal and the wood together. But back in the old day, the blade and the wood were like stuck together, but very often the blade would come off the axe. So there are two possibilities. When the Torah says, when you're chopping tree and then wood, something flew away, is it referring to a piece of wood jumping off the tree, or is it referred to the blade handle falling off of your weapon or of your axe? So it's a debate. If you look at the Mishnah here, if the blade was displaced from the handle and that's what killed, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, that means the editor of the Mishnah says he was not exiled, and the rabbi says he is exiled. And the other case, if the piece of the tree flew off, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says that is the exile case, and the rabbi says he is not exiled. And so in other words, the rabbi and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi argue how to read the Torah. The Torah says if you're chopping wood and you kill someone, then that's exiled. According to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, that means when the piece of wood flies out, you're exiled. But if the handle splits, if the blade splits off from the handle, that's really your fault. And you can't say that it's inadvertent. Now, did you want to kill someone? No. But in other words, here we see the beginning of the concept that it is possible to be more guilty than just inadvertent, even if you don't hit the level of you did it on purpose. Right? There's on purpose, okay, you want to kill someone. There's total by mistake. According to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, when the piece of wood sprays backwards when you're chopping and kills someone. And then according to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, if the actual blade falls off the handle, you are guilty enough that you're not innocent enough to go into exile, which is only punishment for innocent murderers, but you're not guilty enough for capital punishment because you didn't do it on purpose. So you're in this limbo state where you're on one hand guilty, on the other hand innocent. What we would sort of call in other words, I don't want to use legal terminology, the lawyers, I don't want to jump on me, but in other words, the Torah has guilt, capital punishment, inadvertent, exile, and then in between. And in between means that you're not guilty enough for punishment, but you're not innocent enough for the atonement of exile.
So does that mean that he's allowing the family to come and kill them?
Very good. So it seems like, yes, you're correct. The Torah seems to say that if you kill someone and you're not afforded the benefit of the city of refuge, you are in risk of the blood avenger, meaning the family of the deceased taking their revenge. And you can't I'm willing to go to the city of exile. It seemingly doesn't do this job. It won't protect you because you don't have no right to be there. So that's a whole other topic. But you're correct. That is the assumption here, according to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Now, according to the rabbis, it's the opposite. According to the rabbis, the case of the Torah is when the blade falls off, meaning you have a weapon, but you're using it with permission. You're chopping wood, and it happens sometimes that that the blade falls off. That's the case of inadvertent. When a piece of wood falls off the tree, that is so not your fault at all. You don't even need. It's even lighter than inadvertent. It's totally not your fault, and then you don't even need an atonement.
And therefore, the family won't be able to.
Yes, right, correct. So, in other words, it turns out if you look at the Torah, there's two levels. I killed on purpose, I killed inadvertently. But when you see this Mishnah, we actually come up with 4. I killed willingly, capital punishment. Killed pure inadvertent, whatever that may be, exile. More than inadvertent, but less than on purpose, limbo state, maybe I'm in trouble with the blood avenger, and total not my fault, then I don't need anything. And so that's what comes out from the Mishnah, the way of looking at the Mishnah and looking at the Pasuk. Okay, so now we understand why. Now this is where beginning of the concept, what we're dealing with in these cases. These are modern day cases of someone killed in other words, they had permitted access to deadly weapons. Right? On a movie set, you're allowed to hold a gun. You just hope it has blanks in it. And a police officer is allowed to have a loaded weapon, but she should first have used a taser. But she has a right to have the gun. It's not like if I have a gun, I have no right to it. So if I have a gun, I'm a bad right. But she's allowed to use it in certain circumstances, but not. She didn't follow procedure. So how do you view that? So now we need to look at another the next Gemara here. If you take a look, it says here in the middle of the page, just as with regard to a forest. Oh, sorry. Let's start with that. In the case of the bottom of page 2, in the case of one who throws a stone into his courtyard to kill the person, So again, I'm at a shooting range in my backyard, and I'm shooting my gun. What's the case here? And then I kill someone. So it depends. If I invited the victim to come into my backyard, so that's my problem. I have to worry about him. But if he snuck into my shooting range, it's not my problem, right? I'm totally innocent. So that's what it says. Just like a forest, the victim and the assailant have the right to be there. So too, if the victim snuck into I don't have to worry about killing someone who snuck into my property. That's the first part. But the second part is the real one that we're going to focus on. Abba Shaul says, just as the cutting of the wood is mentioned, meaning it's optional, exile is only if the action you did was an optional action. However, a father who hits his son, a teacher, professor, if you ever hit your student, don't hit students, please. If you hit your students, and an agent of the...
Don't try this.
Don't try that. And an agent of the court, those people, if they kill in their actions, they don't need exile. Or they don't go to exile. That means, because they had permission to do what they were doing. A father has permission to hit his son. Teacher has a permission to hit the students. And a court officer, agent of the court, has the right. Now, what is the agent of the court? Which is actually relevant to us. It's an argument between Maimonides and the Ra'avad. Right? The Maimonides wrote his code, and his main arguer is the Ra'avad, the Ravid. The Maimonides says here, you had at the top of page 3, we're talking about an emissary of the court striking a litigant who refuses to appear in court. That means the agent of the court is trying to arrest someone. That means he's only using force because the guilty or the perpetrator, right, is resisting arrest or refusing to follow his orders. The Ravid said that's not true. That's not allowed force. The Ravid says it's a case where the court agent since in the times of the Talmud, the times of the Bible, there was corporal punishment. So we whipped and gave lashes to people. Then if you gave too many lashes, it was really allowed to give him 12. And you gave him 15, you just lost track or you were just really beating him. So then that's when you're guilty. But that's when you're innocent even. So it comes out that the Maimonides and the Ravad argue two things. We don't know what the argument is, but one thing for sure. If it's in the course of using force to accomplish your goals, i.e. arresting someone, Maimonides says that is a court-allowed action of violence, and therefore it is permitted, and therefore if you kill someone doing it, you are totally innocent. On the other hand, the Rava doesn't agree with that, because that's not a court-allowed force. Okay. Everything right now is so good and fine. We have what?
What is the connection from what we just said to the previous note about the axe of the tree?
So the axe of the tree set up the fact that there's levels of guilt and innocence, and now one of the levels of innocence is permission. So this next.
For example, the professor,
the court, and the father. So in other words, therefore that pushes them into the innocent category. So that means we first saw that there are inadvertent killings that are that are not guilty, no guilty whatsoever. And now we went to the case where, with permission, that's one of those scenarios.
In those scenarios that we just mentioned,
right?
Are they also Mikla kids?
No, they're not even right. So our Gemara, we'll get to see the second Tosefta, but our Gemara, in the name of Abba Shaul, those are, and that's how Maimonides says, no exile.
Okay.
No exile. It says Patur min Hagalut, right? Top line here. Yeah.
So I know this might be a bigger question of that the Torah was written by God thousands of years ago and how much we've learned and come since
right.
then. But what about the fact that it really is no longer permissible for a teacher to hit a child? Right.
So again, if it's no longer permissible for a teacher to hit, then they wouldn't have permission. Right. Yeah. Right. The same way I don't hit my children anymore. Right. So if I would hit my children and beat them, the court should take me away.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So now everything would be great, except what's the monkey wrench? So our oral Torah. Our oral law is the main works are the work called the Mishnah and the Talmud. Great. However, there are additional books of oral law that didn't make it into the Mishnah and the Talmud, but there are statements of that rabbis of that period. And one of those books is called Tosefta. Tosefta means literally the additions, not to be confused with the Tosafosts, who were the rabbis of the Rashi, let's say from Rashi's grandchildren on from the 12th, 13th, 14th century. This we're talking about Talmudic times, 4th century, 5th century, but it didn't make it into the Talmud, but it's Talmudic rabbi statements. So here, smack in the middle of page 3, a messenger of the court who administers lashon with permission goes into exile. And then he adds on, a skilled physician who heals with the license of the court and kills his patient goes into exile. So here we have a contradictory opinion. Here we have an opinion of Tosefta that says that if a messenger of the court kills, he does go into exile, and also brings in a physician who, with permission, is healing someone, but in his course of his healing, maybe whether malpractice or not, kills someone, goes into exile. This is a direct contradiction to what we saw before. So you'll say, okay, no problem. But the problem is, at the bottom of page 3, the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, he codifies this. And he says that if a physician administers medical treatment causing injury, he has to go into exile. That's a contradiction. How could you say that, again, a doctor has permission? So what is any different than the court officer or the father or the teacher have permission who don't go to exile? So this is what a lot of the discussion is based around. Now, what answer? The top of the page is only in Hebrew, so I'll just say it outside. One answer is a simple answer, which is that if you're healing someone and you don't do your job, it turns out you're not healing. In other words, when the father hits his son, he's hitting his son. He's educating him. That's still true. It's just that he hit him too much. When the court is administering lashes, they're allowed to do that. But if the doctor ends up not healing, so then he's not a doctor. But that's like seemingly very legalistic. It doesn't seem the right answer. The Aruch HaShulchan has an answer, and this really opens up. Now we're going a little bit out of order chronologically, but nevertheless, the Aruch HaShulchan says the Tosefta must be referring to a case where there's some laziness, some not paying full attention on the part of the doctor. For sure, there's no question that if the court officer made a mistake, or the father made a mistake. Like the father heard that his son did something wrong, but he didn't, and he beat him, right? So maybe he'd be guilty. The case, the Tosefta, which says that a physician is guilty for killing, is referring to a case where, in Hebrew, it was either hisrash luso, he was negligent, v'lo ayin yafa. He didn't really look into it. He just showed up to surgery, wasn't really paying attention, didn't put his full efforts in, and that's why it happened. But otherwise, as he points out here, there's no difference between a father, a rabbi, a court officer, and a doctor. Could I trouble someone for a bottle of water? Just the water. My throat got. Thank you.
There's a reason I came to this.
Thank you. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh b'dvaro. So this seemingly answers the question, but it opens a whole can of worms for us. And that is, what does he mean by, so it means a doctor has guilt, or is, you'll use the English words, is either malpractice, then he's guilty. If he does something wrong, he's guilty. But if he didn't do anything wrong, he's not guilty. But it doesn't really give the definition. Now, it's a very interesting case. I know we have to go in a few minutes. The Khatam Sofer. It's in Hebrew, but you'll follow along if possible. The story was there was something happened, and
Where are you now? Sorry.
I'm in the Hebrew at the bottom of page 4. Responsa Khatam Sofer, Orach Chaim 177. He says, "We pachad pisom nis alpha, v'nasa dok kemeisomim." There was a young lady, for whatever reason, got scared. Something scared her, something frightened her. She fainted. Okay, happens. Young lady fainted. So there was her it doesn't say her mother, maybe someone else in the house, was very, very nervous and wanted to get some brandy to, give her a shot of brandy and wake her up. And instead of reaching for the brandy, she reached for the bleach. And she gave her bleach, and she gave this fainted person bleach, and they died. That's the case. And the question is, how do you view the person? Now again, what was their intention? To help. No malice aforethought, no bad intentions. And again, you tell about you should have been calm. No, it wasn't a calm situation, right? The situation, and again, she was nervous. She saw someone faint. She just reached. So what's the case here? So the Chatam Sofer says that this is it right? I think it was. Sorry, did I say bleach? It was petrol. She probably poured kerosene down her throat. Either way, that's what it says here, right? And she died. So the question, if you need, he says here, Masa ishu ledvar mitzvah latzalas nefesh. It's even better than a parent, and if for sure she's innocent, then for sure she's innocent. That's basically this long quote of the Chatam Sofer. That's very interesting because he seems to ignored the Tosefta, which is brought in the Shulchan Aruch, which says there's some guilt if a doctor kills inadvertently. So he must be. The assumption is that he follows this idea of the Aruch HaShulchan. Again, Aruch HaShulchan was much later than the Chatam Sofer. I know that, but he must be understood the same thing, that if you're doing something and you followed every procedure and you did what you were supposed to do, that's even a way better than a father and a court officer, because whenever you're forced into a situation which is pressure filled and you act and you did what you're supposed to act, then you're okay. It's just only when you didn't investigate properly or the father just kept going, he thought he was doing something good. But in those cases, you had the ability to, let's say, stop. When you make a mistake because of this nervousness or because of you're in a panic mode, pressure time. Thank you. So then, seemingly, both Aruch HaShulchan and Chatam Sofer would allow and say that you're not guilty in such a situation. It's hard to know. It's hard to know. It's hard to know. And it would get. Is that normative? Is that a normative ruling? So now and now with that he repeats this again. If you take a look at now top of page 5, Chatam Sofer, another page, Choshen Mishra 184. Same sort of thing. You had a 15-day-old baby, and something happens, and basically she must have done something. The baby died at her hands, not her fault. No one wants to kill the 15-day-old baby. And again, he repeats it. If you're trying to help someone, and by mistake, that's even with more permission. It's not even guilty of exile. Okay. Now, you can make a case and say, okay, that's good and fine. That's all good, but say a doctor. What about a police officer? A police officer, at the end of the day, has training. And one of the reasons she was actually found guilty of manslaughter was that she should have realized the difference in weight between the taser and the gun. Now, I've never held either, to be very, very honest, but evidently they feel differently. They both, I guess, work on the same mechanism, but they feel different. So that was the claim against her, that even though it was a pressure-filled situation, but that's what police officers are for. And they're meant to be level-headed in pressure-filled situations, and she should have realized her training that what's the real weapon. However, that was the case. That's what the American courts found. That was the claim by the prosecutor and accepted by the jury. It's funny. We have sort of the opposite. If you look here, middle of the page, on page 5, Tosefta and Gittin, which talks about. It says back to that same case, the court officer that hits, and again he doesn't want to kill anyone, and he by mistake, or if a doctor. We don't hold them responsible because of tikkun olam. And that's a very famous phrase, tikkun olam, but here it means that if we would find every police officer guilty, who tried their best but made a mistake, no one would ever want to be a police officer. No one would ever want to be a doctor. And this Nachmanides speaks about many times. It is right, and that he says interestingly that the permission, that the reason that the Bible gave permission for doctors to be doctors, it wasn't because there are two ways to understand it. One is, if I believe in God, what do I need a doctor for? That's not what Nachmanides says. The Ramban says the reason the Torah went ahead and gave you permission to let you know that if you try and you mess up, a lot of times, doctor, right? A cancer doctor, right? Most of his patients will die, or hopefully not, but like many of his patients will die. So he said, "What's the point of doing this? Maybe I would have caused someone to die, right? It happens." So that's exactly. So the Ramban says, "No, the Torah's permission is so that you should know. Don't be afraid," and that's what the Tosefta says. The Tosefta says that. We have this tikkun olam, we have this enactment for the good of the world. We want doctors, we want court officers, and therefore, if they do something inadvertent, we automatically declare them to be innocent. Now, I know I'll just go a few more minutes. 2 more minutes. So I'm going to skip ahead, but there's a whole discussion here. When you're allowed to kill someone, but you are able to shoot for the legs, do you have to? But we don't have time for that. I want to show you two things. Here you have on the next page, the one that's copied. So this is from malpractice. This is from malpractice. This is from the laws of doctors. Yeah.
I know we're pressed for time, but just a question.
Yeah.
Can't you apply that same logic to the person who's cutting the tree? Don't we need people to cut trees?
The answer is, my answer to you would be is no. That means certain societal needs are like doctors and court officers are societal needs. Of course, we need wood, but you wouldn't consider like you can't make right. I mean, that's the question. Like toilet paper. I don't mean to be like silly, but in the pandemic, right? There's no toilet paper, right? Is it a national interest to nationalize all toilet paper making facilities? So yes and no. Like everyone needs toilet paper, but like you wouldn't say like it's of national interest, but.
Wood.
Right, but that's everyone's personal need. Again, it's a very hard line to decide what is a national interest or a communal interest, and what every person needs. But you wouldn't call that communal interest. But again, it's slippery. It's not a simple thing. So here you have this is a book called Nishmas Avram. I am on this page, the photocopied page in Hebrew on the right hand side. You see my little right this one. It's the third to last page. You passed by, right? So this is from the Nishmas Avram. It's from a doctor. It's a great book for all physicians or anyone in the medical field. And here he's quoting his rabbi. The rabbi here is Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, one of the leaders of Orthodox Jewry, one of the leading decisors in the 20th century. And he writes, talking about a doctor, for example, Hoshit Yodo Likach Sakein Tov. He reached his hand to take a clean knife, but he took a dirty knife. That is an example of exile. And he says the same thing, right? That's what he's talking about. Right. Okay. So there's other places here, and then he says in other words, and I can't find the word I didn't mark it off. It's on the top of the page here. He says, "Okay, I can't find it right now." But the point is that he says very similar to the Aruch HaShulchan, which is that if the doctor did something wrong, then it's the doctor which gets exile. So if he made a mistake, so in theory, this would seem to indicate that Kim Potter should have realized which gun, or I don't know if a loaded gun feels heavier than the blanks. Right.
This isn't just a case of malpractice where you go to do a brain surgery and it just doesn't.
Right. Correct.
She should have.
Right, and that's what he says here. If the doctor reached for a dirty knife, and he reached wrong, then he does get exiled. He is guilty. Rav Moshe Feinstein here. This is you have Rav Moshe Feinstein, also about a doctor. In the right, im lo hayadavar bahol, oshay rofa mumcha, right, v'lo ayin yoser merigilosov. He didn't investigate as much. He wasn't as careful. It's called, that's the guilty. It says right, and even though you thought it was, I don't have to pay too much attention. This is standard. But so that means a doctor who doesn't pay full attention has some guilt. But on the other hand, a doctor who does what they're supposed to do and paid attention and then still made a mistake, it's not a problem. Now, we didn't answer it. We didn't answer we're not here to decide the Kim Potter case or the Alec Baldwin case, but we're here to show you that a lot of the question that they asked is how much should you have investigated is actually very similar to how the Torah's perspective is, which is you're allowed. We don't want to, especially with police officers, we don't want, and maybe we have a tikkun olam not to investigate or not to find them guilty. But if there was something that they did, which in their state of panic, they could have figured out that they didn't, that could be a case of where there's actually some guilt and you would have to be in some way exiled or look for atonement. And I thank you for joining me on this first Torah study of the spring semester 2023. Thank you all.